Call this meeting to order in Monterey. One Water Budget Personnel Committee on September 12th, 2025. We'll start out with roll call.
Monterey,
Here.
Marina Coast, Sand City,
Here.
Castroville.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, do we have any additions to the agenda? From staff?
No addition.
Anything from the board, from the directors? Okay, we'll call for approval of agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Any public comment? Don't see any. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Now up is public comments. Anyone wishing to address the committee on matters not appearing on the agenda today may do so now. I don't see any public here. Nothing online. Okay, we'll move on. Item number 6, business items. Consider approval of Budget Personnel Committee minutes of April 11th, 2025. Take it to the board for any questions, comments on the minutes. Anything from the public? Back to the board for action.
Motion for approval.
Second.
Okay, motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and the motion carries unanimous. Item B, consider recommending awarding a professional services agreement to Wilden Financial Services for wastewater rate capacity and comprehensive fee study.
Good afternoon, committee chair and committee members. My name is Ron Chiu, Director of Finance. Today, I'm presenting the professional service agreement with Wilden Financial Service for wastewater rate capacity and comprehensive fee study and a cost allocation plan in an amount not to exceed $120,000, $560. Let's look at the PowerPoint presentation, slide number 2. Monterey Water is in the last year of a 5-year Prop 218 rate increase. So for the next fiscal year, 26-27, we need a new rate study in order to fund the operating costs, capital improvement, debt covenant, and the reserve requirement. In August, the agency issued the RFP for the rate study and the cost allocation plan. We received 3 proposals. The proposals are from Bartel Wells Associates, Ralph Tellers, and Wilden Financial Service. Next slide, please. The evaluation committee includes the executive officer, director of finance, and director of engineering service. And the committee select Wilden as a top firm based on the experience they have with the water and wastewater study and also the cost allocation plan study in California. They have a very unique approach. They understand the importance that integrate utility planning, engineering, and finance. In addition, they will provide the client with a very robust financial planning model dashboard, and they have a very strong communication plan with the clients. Next slide, please. So the selection is mainly based on the qualification, their experience on the rate study and the cost allocation plan, and the approach on how they handle the project, and the experience of the consultant that were assigned to this project. The table below outline the fee from the 3 proposals. Bartel Wells is around $280,000. Ralph Tellers is $256,000. And Wilden Financial Service is around $137,000. Next slide, please. And staff recommend the committee recommend to the board of directors and authorize the executive officer to execute a professional service agreement with Wilden Financial Service for the rate study and the cost allocation plan in the amount not to exceed $137,180. I want to emphasize that this amount does not include the mailing, postage, and processing of the Prop 218 notice, which is approximately around $100,000. And the finance department has budgeted the $100,000 and the consulting fee in the current year budget. And this concludes my presentation. Do you have any question?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence.
With that, I'm going to turn over to our consultant, Chris. Fisher from Wilton Financial Service.
Yeah.
He's going to present the high-level overview of the rate study, the approach of the study, and also the project timeline. Please.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm not seeing the presentation. Is it going to be, there we go. Looks like it's coming up. All right, good evening, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Chris Fisher with Wildan Financial Services, and I'll just run through just a quick overview of our team and our approach, and obviously be available for any questions. So here's an overview of our team. I'm the overall, Chris Fisher, the overall principal in charge. I'll be working very closely with Michael Cronin and Alice Boo on the rate study portion of the project. And you see kind of an outline of their experience and what their roles are. And then my colleague, Tony Thrasher, on the cost allocation plan. And he and I, our whole team has worked together for many years and on each of these different components. And so that's the team. And we'll also be supported by several analysts who will help here on the back end with gathering and verifying data and incorporating that data into the models and helping with preparation of documents and things like that. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the different types of work where Wildan Financial Services specializes. Cost allocation plans and miscellaneous user fee studies is one area, and we will be working in both of those as part of this project. There are some miscellaneous fees that are included as part of this study, and of course the cost allocation plan. Development impact fees, utility rate and cost of service studies, which of course is the bulk of the work associated with this project. That, you know, we have experience both water and wastewater, as well as solid waste and even some electric experience. We provide financial and economic impact and feasibility studies and long-term economic strategic planning. And we help with the formation and ongoing administration program management for special districts, things like assessments or special tax districts, things like that. And then finally, we help public agencies all over the country with their outstanding municipal debt, ensuring they comply with IRS and SEC requirements. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick overview of some of the various areas of the country where we work. You see California is really the predominant sort of blue blob there. Lots of experience in California. That's where we're headquartered. We do have offices. You see the locations there in California and Colorado, Arizona, Texas, Florida, and Washington, D.C. And then all the blue dots represent different areas where we have worked in the country. So kind of a wide breadth of experience across pretty much the whole country. So I'll talk a little bit about the utility rate, the sewer rate study first. Really, the approach is built around asking and answering three primary questions: how much revenue is needed, who is incurring the costs, and by that we mean which customers and which groups of customers, and then what do the rates need to be in order to generate the revenue. That was the part of that first question. So for the first question, to determine that, how much revenue is needed, we conduct a comprehensive revenue sufficiency analysis, which really provides the basis for the whole rate study, it's the basis for the financial plan, and that data also factors into the cost of service analysis. The cost of service analysis is where we take all of those costs and assign those out to different functions and customer groups so that we can calculate the proportionate cost of service for each of those groups as required by Prop 218 for the cost of service portion of Prop 218. And then finally, we proceed to the rate design, where we take that cost of service analysis and use it to create the rate structure, any changes in the rate structure or adjustments in the rate structure, but ultimately the rates that are charged to customers for service to ensure that those collect adequate revenue. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more detail on each of those kind of phases. The revenue sufficiency analysis you see there on the left, kind of the purpose of that. It's really the development of the comprehensive financial plan, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. We take into account all of the budget information, any outstanding debt, capital plan, the goals and policy objectives. For instance, the reserves. There's three reserves: emergency reserve, capital reserve, and operating reserve. We look at all the outstanding debt, not just paying that debt, but maintaining compliance with bond covenants for required levels of coverage. The capital plan will be a huge, very significant part of the analysis. As you may be aware, capital projects are typically very expensive and long-lived, and so the ability to finance those either through ongoing rate revenue or through debt or a combination has a big impact on how the financial plan comes out. And then, of course, the operating and maintenance budgets, replacement of aging system components, routine upgrades, things like that. So that's kind of an overview of the revenue sufficiency analysis or revenue requirements analysis. Next slide, please. And from the budget and cost data that goes into that, we then add to that the system operating data and historical customer billing data, so that we can determine customer use patterns, demand patterns for each specific group of customers, and then allocate the costs that we use to develop the revenue requirement out to those customer groups in a way that reflects their demands on the system and the cost of serving them. And again, that is what Prop 218 requires. The substantive components of Prop 218 require that we ultimately end up with rates that reflect the proportionate cost of service. And so that's the purpose of this analysis, is to ensure that ultimately the rates we develop are based on the cost of service. And then next slide. Really, this cost of service analysis really flows into the rate design, so that the rates that we end up with reflect that proportionate cost of service and generate the appropriate amount of revenue to pay for all of the financial needs and financial objectives for the utility. And finally, and really the last slide, or next slide, this doesn't come last. The communication and the ongoing engagement goes on throughout the process. So obviously at the end, we have the deliverables, the meetings at the end, and the report and the public presentations. But throughout the process, there are engagement meetings and workshops and to discuss results, discuss potential options or scenarios, so that ultimately when we get to the end, stakeholders and the board and staff all understand what was involved in developing the analysis, how the results were influenced by various factors, and ultimately what led to the recommendations. And it's really important. It's one of the really more important than the technical analysis is to make sure that we provide all the information in a clear manner, so that ultimately the folks who make the decisions, the elected officials, understand all of the analysis, how it came together, and can feel confident that they have what they need to make those decisions for the recommended rates. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost allocation plan component of this study. And this is just a sort of graphic representation of what a cost allocation plan is, and ensures that reimbursements that are paid by your member agencies back to you are appropriate and reflect how they are provided and supported with the administrative overhead functions. And so you see kind of a graphic there that shows the administrative functions, information systems, IT, finance, and those services being provided to the member agencies. And so we want to develop a methodology that accurately reflects the level of service that those folks get, and then develop a data-driven approach for calculating those allocations, so that again those reimbursements make sense and that they're equitable and that they're not arbitrary. They're based on solid data and an analytical approach. Next slide, please. You'll see a kind of an overview of the process. We begin with a lot of financial data, information about the organizational structure, specifically the functions that the overhead functions provide. And we look at those costs and evaluate, which ones are appropriate to be allocated, and then determine how those member organizations benefit from and use those services. And then we identify data that best reflects that. And like I said, that the Office of Management and Budget, provides guidelines for how to develop a cost allocation plan. And one of the keys is to have a data-driven approach using data that's readily accessible, easily updatable. And so we'll identify those types of data sets, incorporate those into the model, and then calculate those allocations, and then meet with the member organizations to explain the results, take feedback and input, make sure that we're clear on any questions and make adjustments where necessary. And then finally, ultimately, after we go through as many iterations as necessary to present results, modify the analysis, and present the the updated results, that then when everything is nailed down, we prepare a report and present the results again, in a way that makes sense for those that need to understand it. And here is a timeline for the water rate study. So you see, this really extends out to next June. We are targeting having the new rates adopted in June so that they can be implemented for the 26-27 fiscal year. So you see, we start immediately in October with gathering and reviewing and validating the data, and then proceeding with the wastewater rate study and the connection and capacity fee study at the same time, as well as the miscellaneous fees. And I won't read each of those steps. You can kind of see, how that work flows to the point where we're finalizing reports and documentation in March, and then having the first meeting with the board to set the date for the public hearing. But leading up to that, there will be meetings throughout the process. You see there at the bottom, essentially every couple of weeks. And then during the process of preparing the final reports, some workshops. And then, one of the first things that we'll do when we sit down with staff to get started in the beginning of October is to really talk about that stakeholder engagement process and what meetings and presentations are going to be necessary before we get to the point of setting the public hearing date, and then build the timeline around that to make sure we've got, the analysis and the work and everything done in time to meet that deadline, because then really the board meetings kind of flow from that point. And then the next slide is a timeline for the cost allocation plan. Go ahead and advance the next slide. And really, there's a lot more flexibility. I mean, ultimately, the results of the cost allocation plan are important to the analysis for the water rate study, or the wastewater rate study. But we're not, adopting anything specifically. This doesn't have to go to the board meeting to be, adopted at a public hearing. It will be, but it's not subject to the requirements of Prop 218. So there's a little bit more flexibility. We don't have to have, a 45-day notice period and things like that for cost allocation plan. So again, when we sit down at the beginning of October to really map out the process in a little bit more detail, we'll incorporate the steps for the cost allocation plan to make sure we've got the data output we need from that to factor into the wastewater rate analysis and ultimately develop the rates. Next slide, please. And then this is just a quick disclaimer. So Willdan Financial Services is we are registered as a municipal advisor with the SEC. We're not acting in that capacity for this study. So this is just a disclaimer stating that. So, we are still allowed to develop some scenarios. We can incorporate assumptions for anticipated debt during the projection period, and even including, what the debt service payments might be, but we're not providing any structuring guidance or terms or, specific information related to the offering of debt. It's just for planning purposes and for development of the financial plan. And that concludes the presentation. So available for any questions or to provide any more detail that you might need. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Look to the directors for questions.
I had a question earlier, and that was just under the bid process. I noticed that there was that Wilden come in much lower than the others, but I believe that there was explained that there was an additional cost later down the road.
All the three consultants, there will be additional costs for the agency to pay for the postage and processing for the Prop 218. This is not including the pricing.
Yes, thank you.
So it's roughly around like $100,000 based on the current estimate.
Okay, and thank you very much for that.
For staff, I asked this before in a previous session. I can't remember exactly what the item was, but what I was hoping for when we do the bid presentations, that we could have some information as it relates to the selection criteria and the process, just to kind of help with a little bit more transparency. So what's been provided here is good, but it would be helpful if we could have some additional info on the staff presentation in the future, if that's possible. I don't.
Yes, we'll add additional information.
So Tyler, are you referring to slide 4 from Lawrence's presentation, where he identified that the selection process considered qualifications, relevant experience, approach to the project, and experience as far as what percentage of the points were identified for each one of those? Because I'm sure it was not a 25 all the way
Yeah,
down.
yeah. I think having a more detailed description of how we got there, what were the scores for each of the candidates who participated in the interviews process selection. Um, uh, I don't want to make it too cumbersome, but
Right, because he had identified that there were 3 people on the evaluation committee. So there was basically Paul, Matt, and Lawrence. He didn't identify them through name, but through title. And so what I've seen before is like what percentage was qualifications, what
right.
percentage.
Yep.
It would be
the
pretty
different criteria.
pretty intricate if you went and asked for the scores for each one of those. So I don't have a problem adding the percentage, and then you get an idea of what created more weight on the decision making.
Okay. Okay.
We could certainly do that.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. I think the more information, the better, just for transparency. And I understand sensitivity around some of this. So thank you for that, Sammy. And then for our consultant, thank you for your presentation. If I understand correctly, and maybe I'm focusing on the wrong area to get to the point that I'm trying to make, but I think it was the rate design analysis portion. Is that the portion of the process where we'll be looking at how we want to charge our ratepayers?
That's correct.
Okay, so some of the things that we talked about as examples in the past is charging our ratepayers based off of square feet or how many water fixtures are in the property. Is that accurate? Like
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
perfect.
And that's where we'll explore those kind of options and, which approaches might make sense, which ones are feasible. But yes, those are the kinds of things we'll look at during that rate design portion of the project.
I love it. Thank you for that. And then my last question is, and maybe more of a statement. What would be helpful to see when we're looking at different alternatives for our rates is right. So right now our agency is kind of paying for our infrastructure needs as we go, like paying for those projects as opposed to setting enough funding aside to maintain those pieces of infrastructure. So it'd be great to have an analysis done or rate proposals that look at setting rates where we're setting enough funding aside to enhance our reserves so that instead of having to do financing, we can have the funding there that's actually maybe making money for us and putting us in a better financial situation. So hoping that could be something that we include as far as some alternatives that are provided to the board.
Yes, sir. We have the ability to model, lots of different assumptions for levels of funding in all of the various reserves and look at even on a project by project basis in the capital plan, funding them either from, reserves or directly from rate revenue or funding them with debt or some combination. And so we can look at all of those different approaches and see what their impact is on the overall financial plan and ultimately the impact on the rates. And then, that becomes part of the decision making because, clearly, understanding those different impacts is part of deciding, which approach makes the most sense. So yeah, we certainly are able to provide that kind of information to help in that decision making process.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
You're welcome.
Okay. Can we go out to the public now? Any public questions, comments on this issue? Don't see any. Okay. Bring it back to the directors.
Move approval.
Got a move. Got a second? Second. We got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries unanimous. Move on to item C, consider recommending adoption of a resolution approving the statement of investment policy. And Lawrence, you're taking
Yes, this is Lawrence Shu, the Director of Finance. I'm presenting this item as well. In April this year, the board of directors approved a professional service agreement with Chandler Asset Management to manage the investment portfolio of the agency. Before we decide how we're going to invest, first of all, we need to look at the investment policy because it has not been presented to the board for approval for multiple years. So according to California Government Code 53646, they will require the legislative body to approve the investment policy at a public meeting. So today, we update the investment policy, and Chandler Asset Management Comment will be presenting some of the major changes. In addition, this item also requests the committee to recommend to delegate the investment authority to the Director of Finance Treasury for a period of 1 year. This will be an annual delegation of the investment authority. So next year, at the same time, we will be coming back to seek another extension for the authority. In addition, Chandler Asset Management will help us to identify the investment strategy that will be benefit for the agency to earn the higher investment earning. And lastly is how we're going to benchmark the investment activity. With that, I'm going to turn over to Chandler Asset Management. Our investment consultant, Comment, is here to do the presentation.
Thank you, Lawrence. And can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you again for choosing to retain Chandler Asset Management for your the Monterey One Water asset management needs. I'll begin here with the updates that we have done. Lawrence and I and the finance staff have put a lot of effort into updating the existing investment policy to be more in line and consistent and concise with California Government Code. If we could go to the next page. I guess the next one, because we're already there. So what is an investment policy and what does an investment policy do? Just a brief overview. It defines the investment program. That point is relatively clear. It permits and prohibits activities and investments. It defines measurement of results, and it defines the relationship to counterparties. It provides protection. It delineates fiduciary responsibilities, oversight, and the delegation of authority, and of course, reporting on the investment returns. It also addresses investment policy process. So if a security is downgraded, for instance, or as Lawrence just mentioned, we have chosen a benchmark that we believe will be the most beneficial for the district, and it also defines risk management tools as well. In the next slide. So there's 3 key objectives, and this is the core fundamentals of California Government Code, really, and of course our best practices at Chandler Asset Management. And that's first and foremost safety of principal. So safeguard your principal. Make sure that that is safe first and foremost. The second is meet liquidity needs. If there's any unforeseen needs for liquidity, we need to create an investment program that can facilitate any kind of liquid cash flows that may come about or are planned. And third is achieve a market return and a yield that is in line and consistent with California Government Code and the parameters set forth in the investment policy. On the next slide. So what I did here, or what I should say we did here, is what you're looking at is on the left, the prior M1 Water investment policy. Someone put certainly a lot of effort into it. It was unique to say the least, but Lawrence thought that we should make the policy really reflect California Government Code and be certainly much more in line with it. So we took the policy and then we really wanted to define the parameters that are set forth in California Government Code. So we redid policy scope and exemptions, which defines which funds and investment activity are covered, of course, along with specific exemptions. The pooling of funds for efficiency, consolidating eligible funds to maximize earnings, streamline administration, and allocate income proportionally, of course. And the prudent investment standard. This is straight out of California Government Code. It requires fiduciary care, skill, and diligence in managing public funds with accountability and timing of the reporting and risks. On the next page. So just a little bit deeper dive into the scope and prudence revisions that we have recommended for the policy. The scope of coverage, it applies to all district funds and investment activities under the state California Government Code 53600, with exceptions to any debt issuance proceeds. So if you guys issue bonds, those will be covered by the bond covenants and the CalPERS trusts and any other funds that are exempt by the M1 board. Pooling of funds, like I just mentioned, district consolidates most cash and reserves to maximize earnings and, of course, improve efficiency and streamlined administration, with investment income allocated proportionally to generally accepted accounting principles and the prudent investment standard. So it authorized decision makers are fiduciaries required to act with care, skill, and prudence and diligence, considering economic conditions and agency needs to safeguard that principle, like I had mentioned off the top, and ensuring liquidity. And of course, responsibility and accountability. The director of finance is authorized to authorized manager following the policy and due diligence are not personally liable for credit or market losses but must report any significant deviations that take corrective action. So that's just essentially, really summarizing what the prudent investment standard is. Moving on to the next slide. So we also revised the risk management and diversification section to be more in line with code. And the diversification and issuer limits is one of the main key revisions. So the portfolio credit risk is reduced by diversification rules, and a 5% cap per issuer was added for diversification. And then there are just a couple of exemptions with U.S. government U.S. government treasuries. So as far as active risk management is concerned, securities may be sold before their maturity to manage the quality, liquidity, or yield of the portfolio, and downgraded securities, of course, are going to require monitoring, reporting, and board notification, and that is all delineated within the investment policy. So liquidity protection, at least 6 months of budgeted operating expenses must be held in short-term investments to ensure that the district has the sufficient amount for those cash flows, and that's part of the investment program, which is delineated in the investment policy. And the market risk controls. Investments are capped at 5-year maturities. That's straight out of California Government Code, with overall portfolio duration kept within plus or minus 20% of the selected benchmark, which we will review here in a moment. Active monitoring and adjustments, adjusting holdings based on the market conditions, any changes of credit quality, and of course, if there's any changes in evolving cash flow requirements of the district. Moving forward. Again, I took a page from the original investment policy here just to show you some of the revisions that we took out of the policy to be more concise with California Government Code. Of course, safety first. It's always is the main goal of our investment philosophy, and preservation of capital is the top priority. And it's achieved through diversification across the securities with independent returns, and this is language that is now in the policy. Liquidity, the liquidity provision, the portfolio must remain liquid enough to meet all reasonable anticipated operating needs, as I just mentioned, and return on investment. So investments aim to achieve a market rate of return consistent, of course, with the policy risks and constraints and portfolio cash flow needs. We spoke just a moment ago about delegation of authority and oversight. The board is, and Lawrence had just mentioned, the board to delegate investment responsibility to the director of finance. With controls over staff in the district, they may engage the services of a registered investment advisor under this policy and the state law. This was added to the policy to facilitate external investment advisors that the district, of course, has just retained. On to the next slide, please. Again, refining language. That's really the main theme with all of the updates or recommendations for changes to be more concise with code. And along with that comes the authorized dealers and institutions. So there's an approval list and the approved institutions. The director of finance is going to maintain a list of authorized financial institutions. Of course, limited to qualified public depositories, licensed broker dealers, regulated banks, savings associations, of course, the Federal Reserve Bank, and direct issuers of eligible securities. Transaction standards have been updated, so investments should be conducted through authorized firms using a competitive bid process whenever possible, with periodic reviews of financial conditions and compliance of those institutions. And advisor discretion, again, with the enablement of an external investment advisor, we maintain a very strict risk of broker dealers that we transact business with, and we the qualifications to get on that list are much more stringent than California government code even entails. And again, the reporting is going to be as transparent as we can possibly make it. And certainly we will adhere to all competitive bid and offer processes that are going to be delineated here within the investment policy. On the next slide, so authorized and suitable investments. We revised the descriptions to be much more thorough, to describe which sectors the district can invest in. So the language is updated for these allowable investment sectors that really reflect the code that's set forth, or the language that's set forth in code. We recommended for diversification, adding a couple of sectors that were not initially in the investment policy, which are asset-backed securities, mortgage-backed securities, and mortgage pass-through securities, collateralized mortgage obligations, as a diversification measure. And of course, we have very strict limits on the ratings and credit quality of any of these sectors that are within the policy. And of course, the prohibited investments. This is an example on an ongoing basis. We at Chandler will review annually the district's investment policy, and if California government code has been updated, we will incorporate the new updates into the investment policy, or certainly at least recommend those updates. And as part of that, initially we prohibited investment, the purchase of securities with a forward settlement period, that exceeds 45 days. That's a new provision in California government code as of 2024. Again, that's just a liquidity provision, and new rules that are stated here. And moving forward, we will incorporate into the policy as recommendations. Next page, please. So performance evaluation. Again, I thought to take just a picture from the old policy with the cash register there. I'm sure you all have a copy of the new policy perhaps in front of you, but unfortunately we took out all the graphics, and we certainly wanted to make this policy much more consistent with code. For the performance evaluation, the district's investment portfolio will be managed to achieve a market average return, of course, within policy constraints, with performance monitored against the appropriate benchmarks, reported quarterly by the Director of Finance. And I believe that is it for the updates on the investment policy. Happy to answer any questions now if you have them on the policy updates, or we can turn to the investment strategy that we have developed with Director of Finance and also staff over at M1 Water.
Okay, let's ask the directors if we got any questions now. Okay, let's go on with the presentation.
Okay, great. Well, first and foremost, what we had recommended and what we will be implementing for Monterey One Water is a bifurcated investment program. So, as I had just mentioned, and what is going to be stated now in the investment policy, there's going to be sufficient amount of liquid funds, and we're going to have a bifurcated investment program with a money market fund with all of the, which will house all of that liquid assets for any cash flow needs, and then a longer term fund. So the short term fund, this is going to consist of local government investment pools such as LAIF, perhaps short term under 1 year duration securities like T-bills, agency discount notes, perhaps commercial paper, or very short CDs, but most likely in these government LGIPs or investment pools that have overnight liquidity provisions. On the longer term side, on that would be here on the right, we're going to target a longer duration to enhance the diversification and the earnings potential of those longer term funds. And in order to do that, we're going to invest in securities, of course, allowed by California government code. This is going to include U.S. Treasuries, federal agencies, high quality corporates, and pass-through securities. On to the next slide, please. So the strategy that we determined would be the most appropriate and the most beneficial for M1 Water is our short-term bond fund strategy, which it has a 1 to 5 year targeted duration. What you're looking at here is our Chandler composite as of March 31st, 2025. So of all of our clients that are currently within this 1 to 5 year short-term bond strategy, this is the results, and this is what you guys are going to be benchmarked against. So the benchmark is going to be, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but our short-term composite characteristics, I'll just read down the page here. You're going to have essentially, as of now, or as of March 31st anyway, had an average final maturity of 2.97 years. The duration a little bit longer at 2.54 years, and the yield, the purchase yield of the composite was 4.16% back in March, with an average coupon of 3.52%. And you can see the maturity distribution here. It's been our strategy to be tactically overweight benchmark duration, and that is illustrated here in that middle chart with the maturity distribution, overweighted in that 3 to 5 year bucket with 54%, in aggregate for our composite. Really, that's where we have seen a lot of, certainly we have been seeing value in the market on that in the term structure of interest rates, and that is currently what the composite looks like. As far as the sector allocation, it's going to be heavily invested in U.S. Treasuries. I say heavily by around 42% in general for our composite. We certainly, the risk-free rate and the U.S. Treasuries have been is always a core function of the investment portfolio. Along with U.S. corporate, 25% of that is going to be U.S. corporate. Very little in cash because you're going to have those money market funds on the other part of the strategy. And agencies, that may go up or down depending on relative value within other sectors. And of course, that goes with all of these sectors. But currently, this would certainly be likely as a scenario for M1 Water's portfolio moving forward with that ABS 9.1%, CMOs of 7.1%, supranationals at 5%, and then agencies, of course, at 10%. So we decided to choose the ICE B of A 1 to 5 year U.S. Treasury and Agency Index as the benchmark for M1 Water. So that is a longer term strategy as far as California government code is concerned, with a 5 year maturity hard cutoff. So what you're looking at here, and the reason why we believe, and it's our view that this strategy will be in the best interest of M1 Water, is because longer duration strategies have outperformed over time. So what you're looking at are 3 common benchmarks that we use for managing our client portfolios. And that's the 3-month Treasury bill index, the 1 to 3 year US Treasury and agency index. And of course, what I had just mentioned will be the M1 Waters, which is the 1 to 5 year. And as you can see here, this is looking back 20 years. And if you, this is the growth of $50 million in each of these strategies over the last 20 years. And of course, that 1 to 5 year US Treasury and agency index has outperformed the other two if you look at the last 20 years. So typically speaking, in a normal interest rate environment, which we are coming into now with the yield curve normalizing and being upward sloping, coming off of the longest yield curve inversion on record, longer duration securities certainly are providing much more, or will likely provide more value moving forward in a normal interest rate environment. And again, with those over the longer term, over the longer time frame, these longer duration strategies have outperformed historically speaking. Any questions? That's really what I was planning on presenting here. More than happy to answer any questions about strategies or investment policy or anything else you guys would like to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Looking for any questions or comments?
No.
Okay, anything from the public? Don't see anything. Anything else, Lawrence?
No, we don't have anything. I think with the adoption of the investment policy, also investment strategy, pretty much is set the agency to the right direction and earn the higher investment return. I think that's very important for the agency in terms of the capital improvement project.
Okay, great. Anything from the directors?
I guess I do have one question for Carl. What is your sense or read on it's like the $1 million question, of course, like the direction that the economy is going in and us making these changes at this time? How does that help protect us in the potential for an economic downturn? What does that look like? What are your thoughts, all things in that space?
Absolutely. More than happy to address that. So our philosophy of active management, we have a 6-month investment horizon and a longer term investment view. And we manage our portfolios for our clients accordingly as a fiduciary. So we anticipate that we're constantly monitoring monetary policy and fiscal policy. And of course, fiscal policy, and that's coming from the executive branch of the government, has been a little different, to say the least, in the last few months. But monetary policy has been somewhat more predictable. And it is our view that the labor market is showing signs of cooling. Having said that, with the labor market cooling, inflation has also been relatively subdued on a backward-looking basis. That's not taking into account any tariff-related or tariff-driven inflation that could still pop up into the system and hasn't yet. But our view is that monetary policy and the Fed will start lowering interest rates and easing monetary policy starting on September 17th at the next FOMC meeting, actually. It's our view that they'll lower interest rates by 25 basis points. What's that going to mean? That means that lower term interest rates are going to start moving lower, and they already have pretty dramatically in the last couple of months in anticipation of the Fed funds rate going lower. So we position the portfolio accordingly. And when I had mentioned that we are tactically overweight benchmark duration, our view hasn't changed for the last 2 years on the Fed and likely path of interest rates. And that certainly has been turned out in it to almost exactly what we had anticipated. And we had a great year for fiscal year 2024, 2025. And we dynamically change our active management strategy depending on market conditions. So, I mean, I know that's a long way to answer your question, but we're expecting some slowing in the economy as from a labor market perspective. and the Fed will likely support the labor market by easing interest rates, which will then probably promote growth. So we might just see more growth, and if inflation continues to behave, then we'll have moderate to below average growth, trend growth in 2026. And of course, we do not plan on changing our view or our positioning in the portfolio, at least for the next 6 months, because the strategy certainly is been working out in our favor.
Thank you for that.
Righty.
I'll go ahead and move approval of staff recommendation.
All right, thank you. Got a
Second.
second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. I think I went out to the public. I'm not sure, but if there's any public comment on this last item. Don't see any. Okay, move on to item D. Consider recommending adoption of a resolution authorizing an update to the procurement policy solicitation threshold.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Johanna Vargas, Grants and Procurement Manager, and I will be presenting this item. The Monterey One Water Board of Directors last approved updates to the purchasing solicitation limits on June 5th, 2017. These approved limits reflect the laws applicable to the county sanitation districts, and under these laws, any public works over $35,000 requires formal bidding. And also, the agency has the flexibility in setting the procedures for the goods and services and professional services. Next slide. For almost 10 years, the agency has maintained the same solicitation limits across the board. We have the same limits for public works, goods and services, and professional services, and they're being shown on the screen right now. So anything less than 5,000, it's an informal solicitation, and we require one quote. Between 5,000 and 35, informal with 3 quotes, and anything over 35,000 requires a formal solicitation, that it's an invitation for bids or a request for proposals. Next slide. In order to streamline the purchasing and ease the workload on staff, we evaluated the purchasing solicitation limits for a list of comparable agencies. In the table in front of you, you'll see that Monterey One Water, it's on the lower side of this solicitation limits. Then the middle, it's around 50,000, and the highest, it's at 220,000. Now, I would like to note that the highest limits, it's due to these entities adopting the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act under AB 2249, which allows higher limits for formal solicitations. Monterey One Water has not adopted this code, so at this time, we are not allowed to use the higher limits. Next slide. After reviewing the comparable limits, the staff is proposing to split the limits into 2 categories. So category 1 will be for goods and services and professional services, and category 2 will be for public works. Anything related to public works will stay with the same limits at 35,000. It goes out to public bid. And in category 1, we want to higher limits because we are allowed to have higher limits for that category. Next slide. We are proposing to increase the limit of from 5,000 to 10,000 for informal solicitation, require only 1 quote. With the recent changes in inflation and cost increases, we feel that increasing from 5,000 to 10,000 will reduce the amount of time that staff is spending requesting quotes for different items. We're also increasing the solicitation for formal biddings from 35,000 to 50,000. Again, this is just for the category 1, which is the goods and services and professional services. Next slide. The staff recommendation is that the Budget and Personnel Committee recommend that the Board of Directors consider the adoption of a resolution authorizing an update to the procurement policy solicitation thresholds. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Look to the directors. Questions?
Move approval.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Did you want to go to public for?
Yeah, we better go to the public.
Oh.
We have any public comment on this?
There's really no public, actually. Sorry, I didn't realize.
We're trying. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
That seems to be very reasonable amounts. Okay, now we move on to item 7, staff reports. Tammy?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to talk, let you know that we're all extremely busy. We have an inspection with DDW on Monday for the AWPF expansion. All the equipment in the last few weeks have been run independently operated, but just recently we've operated them all together. And of course, the water we produce goes to the SVRP pond. It is higher quality than the tertiary and meets their requirements. And so when we have the meeting, so Jose's team, his AWPF team have been working real hard, been working with IS to go for all the alarms because that's what DDW will be looking for the commissioning. Do we have all the alarms in place to make sure we are producing in spec water? And so that's been keeping us busy. And then we are working diligently with Rachel for the big parties in October, trying to get some aesthetically pleasing and improvement to the RTP because we will have a lot of people on site for not only the ribbon cutting, but also the open house. So in fact, Rachel, do you want to give any updates on the parties?
Yeah. Sorry for it. Thanks, Tammy. Good afternoon. I hope you all received your invite to the Thursday, October 2nd ribbon cutting, where we will get to celebrate a critical community milestone as the expansion of Pure Water Monterey now represents more than 60% of the Monterey Peninsula's water supply. So that Thursday, we will cut the ribbon on the facility. As Tammy shared, lots going on in the background for our team as we push to deliver that water. As you may remember from Dave Lindau's update, there is the critical path still with the permit, but we'll still cut the ribbon on Thursday, October 2nd. Hope to see you all there. On Saturday, we will have public tours. It will be RSVP because safety is our #1 priority. And so we need to have groups that we can safely move through the advanced water purification facility. But heading out next week, we are utilizing a distribution list of one of our project partners to help educate the public on these public tours. There will be about 20 spots available through a series of tours every 20 minutes from 11 to 2. And so once we have that out and at the board meeting, I'll make sure you're all aware of it and in case any of your teams are interested in joining us. But it is through RSVP, so they must RSVP to get our address and understand how to access the facility. But we're excited to share the expansion with the public. This is something we wanted to do on the base project. But after we celebrated the base project, we went into the pandemic. So this is many years in the making of wanting to share Pure Water Monterey and the actual advanced water purification facility versus the demo with the public. Happy to answer any questions if you want more
Rachel.
details.
Which Saturday? Is this the Saturday after the second?
Sorry, I should have said that. Yes, Saturday, October 4th.
Fourth,
So the
okay.
Saturday after the Thursday
I would have
event.
been there this Saturday.
Run ready.
Any other staff reports?
I want to report to the finance department kick off the budget for the next fiscal year. We sent out the template to our department, which is still back to the finance department at the end of September. And after that, for the month of October and November, we're looking at the race model, and we have a Christmas present to the executive officer by December. So we have a draft budget.
Thank you. That's all staff reports.
Thank you, Tammy. Any committee member comments and reports? Okay, we don't have any. Thank you all for attending and we'll adjourn this meeting.